And so a part of my decision was also how much can I change the environment I live in to the point where I can grow as much as possible. And so that was a big part of my decision. And like you mentioned, the cultural difference is obviously huge. And I set foot in Wyoming and I thought cowboys were only something you would see in movies. And suddenly I'm in the classroom and this guy walks in with a cowboy hat and a bucket belt and boots. And you realize that's not the case at all.
Hey guys, I'm Alex Yang, and this is the How I Decided podcast, a show where regular people share important decisions they've made so that we can make better decisions in our own lives and also figure out what we want from our lives and how we want to live our 20s. Hey guys, before we get into today's show, I'd love to talk about a product I really love and use quite frequently called Descript. Descript is how I edit all of my podcasts, and they've made it so easy for people who are just getting into podcasting to do that. Basically, you upload your audio file or your video file and a transcript comes out. And you can essentially delete words from your transcript and that'll delete them from the audio. So super intuitive and easy to use. And I think it's a great place to start if you're looking to start your own content or podcast anytime soon. They have a great free plan that you can use and I highly recommend. So now on to today's show with Ida. My guest for today is Ida Krause. Ida and I met last year at NYU, and we instantly connected over our love for tennis and what the sport has done for our personal growth. Ida lived in Denmark for all her life before deciding that she wanted to play college tennis in the US. But for Ida, America was such a foreign place to her, and there are so many different schools to choose from. In our conversation, Ida and I discussed what she valued most in making her decision about which school to go to, and how she focused on primarily getting out of her comfort zone. But even after picking her school, Ida struggled in her first 6 months of college and even considered quitting. We also talk about that time period for her and how she was able to get through that. If you're new to How I Decided, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow the podcast on Spotify so you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. Now, on to today's show. The first thing I'd love to hear from you is to actually, and I think this is a great place to start, is to share more about Denmark and what it's like to live there, because I'm sure people know what Denmark is, but don't really have an idea of the culture or what it's like to be there. So I'd love to hear about that from you.
The way I view Denmark is a place that's extremely comfortable. I view it as some sort of bubble, for better or for worse, where there are high levels of safety, not many worries for people to have because we are taken care of in many ways when it comes to healthcare and it comes to education. It's a place of comfort, I think, where, we don't have too many things to worry about, truly.
You actually described it to me as a place that's incredible, but as you said, it almost felt so good that you were isolated from the real world. Could you talk a little more about that and why you felt like it was almost too comfy?
Yeah, I think that's where my perspective has changed. I think we are so isolated. We're a very homogenous population, first of all. So we're not necessarily introduced to a lot of different backgrounds. And that creates that bubble where I think living somewhere else has opened my eyes to the fact that people are extremely different. And once you are introduced to people's upbringings, cultures, that completely changes your perspective on life and it betters your ability to understand other people, which is why I'm so thankful for having lived somewhere else, because that's not necessarily something that you go through when that's the only place that you live.
Yeah. And, I think part of your story and actually how we met is through tennis, this wonderful sport. I'd love to hear more about you playing tennis growing up, what that was like for you and how it shaped your character and your kind of early years in Denmark.
Yeah, people who know me know that I absolutely love tennis more than anything. I started playing when I was 5 years old and started playing internationally when I was 11. I traveled the world, and that was really just my first introduction to seeing the rest of the world. I'd say I played on the national team for 4 years and was lucky enough to travel in kind of a team setting, which is cool because tennis is so individual. I love tennis for many reasons. It brought me to the US, obviously, but I also think tennis is a sport that shapes us in so many ways. I think it shapes our character. I think it brings us values. I could talk for hours about what I think tennis does for us in terms of the resilience you build, the endurance, just the fact that the way someone acts in a situation with pressure on a court is how they're going to act in life also when put under pressure. And so I think being on a tennis court, really just playing a match, you're exposed to that kind of pressure all the time. And we have such little, between every single point, we have 20 seconds to make a decision or change your strategy or adapt. And so I think not only can we use that on court, but I think those lessons we can take with us and apply to our lives off the court also, which is why this sport means the world to me. And then you have the whole social aspect. All of my friends are from tennis. So many people in my life are from that sport. And I think the sportsmanship also that is such key to tennis is what makes people in that sport so incredible.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way in terms of the soft skills that you gain from tennis in terms of character, and I think I couldn't have described it in a better way than you just did, and I think that was something that I've tried to find the wording and right phrasing for because I want to communicate that to my future employer who maybe hasn't played before to get them to understand what do I actually mean by saying, "Oh, I can perform under pressure?" And we can definitely talk more about that later on, but I just wanted to say I feel like you described that in a really good, concise way. And for you, we know that you went to the US after, but at what age were you thinking about college and coming to the US? Because I know actually just being around the tennis circles now, there's a ton of great Danish players who have gone through collegiate tennis before, and I'm assuming that you guys were probably all talking about it together, but like, around what time were you starting to consider it?
I think so in Denmark, that's important to mention, we're not really able to play a sport while going to university. So if we want to continue playing regularly many hours a day, our only option really is to go to the US and play college tennis. So I think once you reach a certain age and you realize you still have this love and crave for the sport and you're not ready to let go, I think that's when you decide and prepare to go to the US to play college tennis. For me, that was probably about when I was 16 or 17. I really, truly, from when I was very young, loved the sport so much. I loved being around it. So I always knew that I was going to do that. And so you have this idea and it builds up for so many years, but you don't really know exactly what you're putting yourself through until you hop on a plane and you land in the middle of the United States of America. And suddenly you have to build this life from scratch. But obviously that comes with a lot of excitement. And for me personally, it wasn't really until I landed that I realized what I had signed up for.
When was the first time that you actually visited the US?
So it's funny, I went to University of Wyoming and people always ask me, was that the first time you saw the US? Was that what you thought the country was like?
Yeah, I was gonna
And it
ask you.
wasn't. It wasn't. I'd been to Florida, I'd been to California, and the coasts I think are just way more European than Middle America. For me also in this whole process of figuring out where you want to go in America, because when you're an athlete and you're recruited from overseas, you upload a bunch of information about yourself, your results, you upload a video, and then a bunch of coaches reach out to you. That's how that works. And so I was reached out to by coaches from all over the country, including California, Florida, Hawaii, all these more exotic European places. But at the time, when I was picking a place to go, at first I thought what I wanted was great weather and beaches, all these things. And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, at the end of the day, what really makes us happy? And I concluded that it wasn't going to be the beach or the weather. It was probably going to be the people that I was going to be around every day. It shifted for me in terms of what I was targeting. And so I ended up getting approached by the head coach from University of Wyoming and fell in love with what I think that culture was like. And so I went from Denmark to Middle America, Wyoming.
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about your decision is the US as a country, it's obviously one country, but there's just such diversity, and I think among the tennis programs as well in terms of what you can get out of each experience. And we've talked about this before where I feel like choosing Wyoming for you is almost as far as you can get from Denmark in terms, like, culturally speaking, as you can possibly get, and you could have chosen somewhere that maybe was a bit closer, maybe somewhere that was, like, a school closer to a big city or something like that. So I wanna follow up on that in terms of Wyoming, like, why that made sense for you, um, and maybe how that ties into your initially what you had told me in the beginning about being comfortable at home and wanting to see somewhere different.
I think I got to a point where I realized my surroundings at home were so comfortable that I wasn't necessarily allowing myself to grow as much as I could. And so a part of my decision was also how much can I change the environment I live in to the point where I can grow as much as possible. And so that was a big part of my decision. And like you mentioned, the cultural difference is obviously huge. And I set foot in Wyoming and I thought cowboys were only, something you would see in movies. And suddenly I'm in the classroom and this guy walks in with a cowboy hat and a bucket belt and boots. And you realize that's not the case at all. And so you're introduced to this entirely new world that at first, I will say, was very challenging for me. And the first 6 months abroad were not something I enjoyed, but I'm not a quitter and I'm quite stubborn. And so I stayed throughout that and it turned out to be the best decision. It truly changed my life in so many ways. And I'm so thankful that I did that. But yeah, I think the most important thing to me in making that decision of where to go was how could I grow the most?
I see. And you were able to put that together from talking to the coaches, meeting with the team, seeing where it was.
It's really in the middle of nowhere and the lifestyle is just so different. I come from right outside of the capital of Denmark, more of a city setting, and suddenly I'm in the middle of mountains and endless fields with not a person or a car in sight. And I'm put together with these girls from all over the world. And to I'll never forget, we get picked up from the airport and we are shown where to live. And I enter this apartment and I'm realizing I'm gonna live with this Russian girl for the next 4 years, and I'd never met her. And so, just that thought, thinking back of coming from Denmark, getting there, and the four girls around me are from Bulgaria, Spain, Russia, and the Netherlands, and it's just incredibly different. And having to adjust and understand people that are from such different places also just was a tremendous contributor to that growth that I went through. I think.
And I think what's really admirable about that for you is to have that thought to say, I'm going to intentionally try to do something, put myself in an extremely different environment, and let's see how do I grow from that? How do I adjust for that? And I think there's also a part of that too. I think I felt that way in going from New York to Dallas is also there's an excitement about what it's going to be like, right? Because you've had people that you're surrounded with for a bit, you've gotten close to them, but also to just go see somewhere different, I think is also really exciting. When you were looking at schools like say like Wyoming or schools in California and in Florida, were there any like important people that you were consulting about stuff? Because I imagine so you're in like a different country, right? And you're looking at schools that you may not have ever heard of. You don't know what the reputation is compared to, maybe someone who grew up here is more familiar with the university system here. Who did you have helping you to navigate that?
Absolutely no one. And that's funny because it again isn't until, I've been here for 6 years and I know exactly what associations come with what school and, what part of the country means what. And you have this idea of all these things. And people always ask me that. You had no idea. And I really truly had no idea. It didn't mean no school meant anything to me. All I had to reference was weather or geography, but that's about it. Absolutely nothing. And so that's really truly like also a funny experience, which makes it interesting also because then what you really the only thing you can really take into account is the people you speak to. And so it becomes a lot about the people you want to surround yourself with every day and not necessarily all these other things that come with certain schools.
Got it. So a lot more relationship based. I'm just when you were talking about, I was just imagining you like going on Google Maps or something and looking at where the
Exactly.
random school is and be
No,
like,
that's what I did. Just see Wyoming.com, I'll tell you. That took me a long way.
Got it. Okay. So actually, I actually didn't know that. Like, it's more of a just self-driven, you just trying to figure out or suss things out from talking to people, which I do think is actually maybe in a way made you more unbiased going in. Like maybe other people have various perceptions of programs or even people or peers that they know who have gone to different schools. So they're like, oh, I don't want to go there because so and so is there or something
Exactly.
like some reputation. But you came in with, I guess, because of not knowing anything, just unbiased and just like a blank slate. So
Exactly, and I think people always ask me, "How in the world did you end up there?" And I think that's obviously a very big part of it, that you have no I know what people think of Wyoming. When you ask a random American on the street, I know what bias or association comes with that. I've learned afterwards, but so I really actually appreciated how I had absolutely no bias when I first heard about it because I've come to love the place and I love the people that I've met there and I love the culture. And so being unbiased really truly ended up being a huge benefit for me, I think.
I'm curious as well, actually, because I've met your parents. What did your parents first think when you, I guess, when you were considering Wyoming and when you decided that you were going to go there?
For me or for them, I think it was more of like a tennis decision in terms of what the program looked like and whatnot. But they also knew that the lifestyle at Wyoming was very much very down to earth, nature focused. And they know I value that also. So I don't really think they thought twice about it. I also don't think that they really knew exactly what I had signed up for.
Yeah, it's I guess maybe, like, when it actually is, like, when you just go there for the first time and see what
Yeah,
it's like to be there. Uh,
exactly.
yeah. One of the things I also wanted to follow up, and I think is just a really, I think, important part to your story too, is you mentioning your first 6 months there. I think the word you used when you texted me about that was incredibly miserable. So, I guess what was going on at the time?
I think, again, growing up in Denmark, and something that's important to mention about that environment also is that it's such a small country. So you the people you went to kindergarten with are going to be your best friends when you're 30 and when you're 40 and when you're 50 because people don't move away and we go to elementary school with the same people we go to high school with, and so it's just a very tight knit group of people that you have around you at all times. And so suddenly I'm across the planet and I didn't have anyone around me that really knew me well enough to have the empathy I needed at the time, I think. So that was extremely hard for me. I could look to my Bulgarian teammate and look for some kind of comfort. But at the end of the day, we have such different perspectives on life, and it's hard to find that common ground. And that obviously changes. And now they're like sisters to me, all of them. But at the time, you're just so alone. And I also think it was a lot of pressure, honestly, compared to what I was used to. And I remember feeling like there was a lot of pressure from having to perform academically because if you do not perform academically, you're not allowed to play your sport. There's also that pressure from your coaches of having to perform every single day. And it doesn't matter if you slept 1 hour or 10 hours, you have to do your absolute best every single day at practice for 2, 3, 4 hours. And so that combination of pressures for me was something new because I was lucky enough to never really experience that pressure. So that was something that was very stressful to me. And then that pressure combined with feeling alone was something I really had to get over. And I also think due to the environment that I think I grew up in, I was pretty soft, I think, coming to the US. And so what I really had to go through was getting tougher and tougher. And sure, tennis contributed to that throughout my life before I got to the US, but I had a really long way to go. And I was lucky enough to be around people that never gave up on me because they definitely could have, I'll tell you that. But they didn't. And I'm so thankful for that because it's just made my life so much easier.
So it sounds like you approached that tough period with the mindset of, and looking back right now is a time to grow and develop and just adjust. And this is something I actually love to ask, and I think it's relevant to college sports today because I feel like the transfer portal is something that's pretty big these days. So if no, not just tennis, but I think it's getting big for tennis now, which is that if you're just not liking it somewhere or they don't have any money for you or just you're not getting along with your coach, like athletes will just enter and go to a different school immediately. I do wonder, did the thought ever cross your mind of maybe I'd have a better experience elsewhere, or maybe I'm somewhere where I'm a little too outside of my comfort zone right now, and maybe I should ask some of my friends who I grew up with who are in college now, what are their experiences like there? Like, just walk me through that if you've had those thoughts at all during that time.
I remember the first couple of weeks, and I remember calling my parents, crying, saying, "I'm just gonna do it for a year, and then I'll go home. I'll just do it for a year." And they were like, "No, wait and see." Luckily, my parents would always push me a little bit to not quit at least, and it's also something that's very deep within me that I refuse to quit. I would view that as a failure because at the end of the day, I believe that we can adjust to any kind of environment. And I also believe that the more uncomfortable we are, the more we grow. And so I was also very aware of that the whole time. And I knew, I think, in the back of my mind that when I crossed or came over that hurdle, that would be a big jump in my life. And I think what you mentioned about the transfer portal, I think there is unfortunately, and I think we see this in many aspects of society today, that just the slightest bit of being uncomfortable, people quit. But I also think it's because we have this idea that everything is so much better. And I think that also truly comes from having everything available on our phones and we can see we always see the great things on social media from other places of from other people. So I think it's so easy to believe that the grass is always greener. But I believe that kind of staying in uncomfortable state is really what is going to make us grow the most. And that's also what led me to stay through that period of my life.
Got it. I love hearing that because it sounds like how you got through that tough period is by sticking with your initial intention for going there, which is to be uncomfortable. And maybe in the moment, it felt like you're almost too uncomfortable at that point. But just reminding yourself, I guess, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel and that if you get through this period, which I really love about what you said, is that if I get through this, I'll be so much better for it at the end of it. So it's that kind of thinking about it a bit more long term, which I really like. And from knowing your experience now, it sounds like the couple years after that were really great for you.
Yeah, they were incredible. And I've truly learned so much from being a part of such a diverse team. Like I mentioned, it's not something you're super exposed to in Denmark, where I'm from. So just being around people from such different backgrounds and being on a team and leading the team, it just really teaches you how to unite people that are from such different parts of the world in a very cool way that I believe will benefit me for the rest of my life.
Got it. And now that you've done many years in the US now in college and now working, how do you now think about the US versus Denmark in terms of culture and I guess just living there? What are your thoughts on that?
It's such a good question. I think I love America for the opportunity. I love America for the mindset of everything being possible. I think in Denmark, we tend to maybe limit ourselves a little bit when it comes to that. We're so comfortable that we're scared of getting out of that comfort zone professionally and maybe even personally. So I think I'm just very intrigued by that mindset in the US, but it's also hard to give up that comfort from home when it comes to, like I mentioned, healthcare, education, or just like a society that's so well functioning, the political transparency, all these things. We have no corruption on so many levels. We're such an ideal place. I really truly call it a mini paradise, but I think it's such a trade-off and it's really just such a personal thing what you prefer, or it's maybe even that in your 20s or your 30s, this environment in the US is more intriguing. And then once you want to settle down, maybe an environment like Denmark is more what you like.
So I actually want to get back to what you had said at the very beginning about tennis meaning a lot to you and it's how it's shaped your career and the way you grow up. How do you view it as being a part of your life moving forward now that you're no longer playing in a competitive collegiate environment?
It's such an interesting question because I was very curious to see my own reaction when that was going to happen. Because said the day you don't really know until it happens to you. You can prepare as much as you'd like, but you never really know how it's going to feel. And like mentioned, tennis was everything to me. And I remember being 12, asking my friend at the Danish championships, being like, So when we're done, imagine like how life is going to be. And we just couldn't imagine a life without this. And so you go through it and you play hours and hours every day for so many years. And while you do it, you wonder, is this a waste? And then you retire. And what I've realized and the conclusion I've made is that tennis will always follow you. It's around me in my professional life and my decision making that I catch myself making in the workplace. And so you will never really lose it. And then you can obviously always go book a court. And I'll promise you right now, I'll play until I can't stand up anymore for the rest of my life. But I really realized that you never ever lose it. And so it's not necessarily something I actively miss that much because I see it around me every single day.
Yeah. I think that's something that I wish all, I guess, junior, like high school players who are thinking about college would love to hear because where I was growing up, we had a lot of junior players like myself. We grew up together, we played tournaments. Everyone was pretty dedicated, committed. We had great parents that were able to drive us to all around the country and stuff. But a lot of people I think started dropping off or getting burnt out. And the main reason that I would hear for why is because you're not going pro or something, or you're not going to make a living out of this. So therefore, it's not worthy of your investment. And I heard that like several times from people that were thinking about joining the team at NYU and just decided not to because I think part of it also has to do with the culture and families that people have grown up in. But I think what I wish people would be able to see is that it's not just the benefit just doesn't come from winning prize money or winning tournaments or fame or any of that stuff on the pro level. It's really, I think, about, like you said, the people that you meet, just your mindset and approach to things and like doing work. Like, no, we take it for granted for like tennis players, but like to be able to set your mind on a goal and be able to work for it really hard is like not something that everyone gets the chance to do when they're a young kid, right? So I wish people could see that. It actually, in my opinion, just exponentially elevates your career potential more than anything else, actually, because I feel like it teaches you the right things. It makes you more marketable. Like you said, I like you can talk about it forever as well. I'm
That's
sure
what I mean. We should talk about this more. No,
yeah.
but I think also just I started interviewing, you graduate, and just the amount of stories you have to tell. I have so many things to talk about just from that experience, both from a leadership perspective, but also what I had to sacrifice. You're so young and you're sacrificing so many social events or so many things you sacrifice at such a young age, and it really shapes you and teaches you so many things from time management to discipline, all these things we could go on and on. So yeah, it's just an incredible sport, not only for the ability to go play, but for everything that comes with it also.
So one thing I tried with, and this will be the last part, is like I tried with my friend earlier was just like a quick segment, like for fun of this or that. So I'm going to give you two options, and you're going to tell me which one you prefer. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Forehand or backhand?
Forehand.
Okay. And who is your tennis greatest of all time pick?
Roger Federer.
Tennis or pickleball?
Tennis.
Night out in the city or Netflix?
Ooh, that's tough. I think night out in the city.
Okay. Lifting weights or a cardio workout?
Lifting weights.
Oh, okay. I'm more of a cardio person, and the thought of having to lift weights sometimes scares me.
Really?
Yeah, especially if it's like early in the morning or something.
That's true.
Yeah. Not at NYU though. We would be doing it in the evening.
I'm like,
Okay. American food or Danish food?
Danish food. Always. Bread,
You are
butter, and cheese. All the way.
classic,
The
classic
classic.
Danish. And last one, favorite neighborhood in New York City?
I love West Village.
Do people call it the West Village or are you supposed to say the West Village? Because I saw something on the internet where it's like you're forgetting
No way. I always say West Village.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode with Ida Krause. A few of my takeaways from this conversation was that for Ida, when she framed her decision around this idea of where she could grow the most and be the most outside of her comfort zone, that's what really allowed her to find a great place for her. So I'd really encourage all of you, if you have some sort of hobby or project or maybe new job or new school that you think would be really exciting and you'd learn a lot of new skills, but it's also not really in your comfort zone, I think you should really take some time to think about whether you should go for it, because that can be a really great opportunity to meet different people, to learn new things about yourself. And I think that's what really Ida was able to find in Wyoming, this sort of polar opposite from Denmark. Obviously, that's easy for me to say because, and really hard to do in practice, because I think for decision making, we always want to pursue this kind of feeling good in the moment as opposed to long-term benefits. And it's hard for us to sometimes to imagine those long-term benefits, but I think for Ida, this really worked out in her favor. I think something else I took away is that even when you make the decision to be outside of your comfort zone, it's not always smooth sailing. I think Ida talked about how the first 6 months were a real struggle for her, and that can certainly happen where you're adjusting to new people, new surroundings, and it can feel overwhelming and your mind starts to think about, is the grass greener elsewhere? Which it might be, it might not be, but I think what really helped Ida get through that is being able to understand that if she stuck it through, just stayed tough for a few more months, she would really grow from that. And I think that really actually relates to this idea that I'm really excited about and recently heard on a podcast called Lenny's Podcast, is this idea called mental time travel. And the guest for that podcast was Annie Duke, who I'm also a really big fan of. But basically, it's this idea where when something bad happens to you in the moment, it feels like it really sucks. It feels terrible, feels awful. But usually later in the future, when we look back on something, we're like, oh, that was a funny story, or that wasn't as bad as it was, or but there are actually some positives out of that. A tool that we can really use to help us deal with when we feel like we're struggling with our choices we've made in the moment and it feels really bad is to actually do, so to speak, mental time travel, where you imagine yourself in the future looking back and thinking, well, this wasn't so bad. I was able to get through it. I was able to grow from it. And if you're able to do that in the present, I think that's what really allows you to overcome these challenges. And I think that was the way that Ida, even though we didn't mention explicitly by this name of mental time travel, that's what Ida was able to do, in that seeing that in the future, in 3 or 4 months, she would really have grown from this and become a better person. And if you can do that, I think that can really allow you to push through difficult times and make the most out of your decisions, instead of immediately saying, oh, this was clearly the wrong choice. I should definitely go somewhere else or start a new job or move somewhere new. So I think that's a great tool and something that I really loved. So thank you for listening again. If you have any ideas for the podcast or know of anyone who'd be a great fit, I would love to hear it. Thank you.